Right, so now that we've talked about the major scale, let's talk about how to actually write it out using music notation and finding what the notes are. Again, there are a total of 15 major scales, but don't let this spook you because they're all based on the same pattern. So as long as you remember and understand how to form a scale using this pattern, you can find that major scale using starting with any note. Okay, so right now I have an A here. I'm using bass clef because I haven't seen bass clef in a while, so I want to bring bass clef back. Here's an A. I'm just going to write down A here. Okay, so this is what we call the first pitch of the scale, also called the tonic. Okay, and you'll hear that word repeated again throughout this semester when we start talking about scale degrees. But just remember that the first note of the scale is called a tonic. Right. The second thing you're going to do is actually going to just write out all the letters of the musical alphabet in order, okay? Because a major scale uses every one of these letters. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to the next octave above the tonic. So you're going to repeat that first note that you have, okay? So by the same token, since we're using every note of the musical alphabet, okay, we can also just start writing out the notes on the staff. Okay, so I'm going to have an A, a B, C, D, E, F, G, and A. Okay. Now, this is the start of the scale, okay? It's not exactly the scale because it doesn't yet conform to the pattern of whole steps and half steps yet. So that's the next thing, essentially the last thing we have to do, is to use sharps and flats. And you're either using sharps or all sharps or all flats. So if you end up using both, something's a little amiss. Okay, so using either sharps or flats to make these notes conform to the pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Again, remember that the major scale is consisting of 2 tetrachords. Each tetrachord follows the pattern of whole, whole, half. Whole step, half step. And the 2 tetrachords are connected together with a whole step. So as a way to remember the pattern, I would suggest that we would write the pattern right above the scale that we have right now. Okay, so I'm going to start with between A and B, it should be a whole step. B and C should be a whole step, half step, so that's the first tetrachord. And then whole, 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 half. Okay, this way you keep everything organized. Again, you can see that there are 2 tetrachords in the scale, A, B, C, and D, the first 4 notes. That should follow whole, whole, half. The last 4, E, F, G, and A, should follow whole, whole, half, and they're connected with a whole step in the middle. Okay. Now that I've put that down, I'm going to start looking at each pair of notes, each succeeding pair, and see how whether they are conforming to this pattern, and then if not, I'll need to add a sharp or a flat to make that pattern happen. So first, A, we're not changing because that's the first note of the scale, and in fact, I'm going to use a little check mark to remind me that I'm not changing A. So now I'm evaluating between A and B, and this should be a whole step. So here I have to use my piano keyboard, okay? So this is where we start using the piano a lot. And we're looking at whether between A and B is a whole step, and indeed it is, because it's consisting of 2 half steps. A to A sharp or B flat is 1 half step, that's the next adjacent key, and then B flat to B natural or B is another half step. So A to B is a whole step. So this is fine, so I'm going to check mark that. Okay, so now that I have settled on B, I'm not going to change B. So what I'm looking at is now between B and C to see whether or not that's a whole step. And then if I do need to add an accidental, I'm only adding it to C. Okay, if you start changing this, then it would throw off the pattern for this. So using check marks at this stage is a good way to keep things organized. Okay, so I'm looking at the distance between B and C. This is the keyboard again. Again, remember that this is a one octave of a keyboard, okay, so that the keyboard actually repeats, the whole pattern repeats. So here's the B and here's a C, okay. So the B actually is right below the next C. You can pretend that the C is over here, okay, and We'll put that in the camera a little bit so you can see it. Okay, so the distance between B and C is actually a half step because there's no black key in between. That's the next adjacent key. Okay, so far we have B and C is actually a half step, so that won't work because we need a whole step. Okay, so in order to make this a whole step, I'm going to have to add a sharp to the C, and now it becomes C sharp. Right, so now it conforms to the pattern. A to B is a whole step, B to C sharp is a whole step. I'm going to use a little check mark here to remember, okay, I'm done with C sharp. Next, I'm evaluating between C sharp, write this over here, and D. Right? And indeed, the distance between C sharp and D is a half step, okay, and that's what we need. So no accidental needed. The next note of the A major scale is D. Next, D to E, as it stands, D to E, okay, is another whole step. D to E, indeed, we need a whole step, so this is done. Right, so now the first 5 notes of the A major scale, A, B, C sharp, D, and E. Okay, almost there. Next, we have E to F. Okay, let's take a look at the keyboard. E to F. Okay, this together here, they are the next adjacent keys to each other. So this is, in fact, E to F is a half step. But you can see here, we actually need a whole step at this pattern. So instead of F, I'm going to add a sharp. So it becomes F sharp. Again, remember that you need to keep track and not change the E because the E was already done. Okay, so the only thing we're changing, if needed, is that second note of the pair as you evaluate. Okay. Finally, between F sharp and G, okay, right now F sharp to G is a half step because they're the next adjacent key, okay, but you can see it here in the pattern, we need a whole step. So again, I'm going to raise the G to G sharp, so that from F sharp to G is 2 half steps, F sharp to G, G to G sharp, which makes the distance a whole step, okay, in order to conform to the pattern. So I'm going to add a sharp to the G, again raising it half a half step. I'm going to mark that as done. Now, if everything went well, the very last note, you're going to end with a half step back to A. Okay, and you should not need to change anything. So far, these are the notes of the A major scale: A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. And notice that in order to conform the notes to the pattern, we had to add 3 sharps: C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp.